Hello, everyone. Again, thank you so much for being with us this evening. My name is Eric Eichhoff, and I serve as the Director of Alumni Operations at John Carroll University. We are so grateful that you're taking some time tonight to be with us. And again, my apologies for the tech issues that we were experiencing briefly. Tonight is our next installment of the John Carroll University Alumni Author Series. The Alumni Author Series was launched in November of 2020 as a way to highlight our alumni who have written books, poems, articles, screenplays, and other written works within our alumni community. Tonight, we'll learn more about weight loss and healthy living. Before I introduce our guest, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items with you. First, we encourage you to view the program in full screen mode and use a speaker view. You should be able to select your view in the upper right-hand corner of the Zoom window. Additionally, please ensure that you stay muted throughout the duration of the program. Following the moderated portion of our conversation this evening, you'll have an opportunity for questions and answers. Please utilize the chat feature for your questions, and I will curate them and ask Dr. Prologo as many as possible. Thank you. It is now my honor to introduce Dr. J David Prologo, a member of the John Carroll University class of 1996. Dr. Prologo was born and raised in Youngstown, Ohio, where he attended Ursuline High School. During his time at John Carroll, he majored in biology. Dr. Prologo went on to attend the Ohio State University School of Medicine, completed his postgraduate training at University Hospital's Case Medical Center, where he served as a chief resident, then went on to Vascular and Interventional Radiology fellowship training at the Metro Health Medical Center in Cleveland, Ohio. During the subsequent years, he completed obesity medicine training and certification, then began a uniquely impactful trajectory of academic research and clinical practice. He is currently an associate professor in the Department of Radiology and Imaging Sciences in the Emory University School of Medicine. Dr. Prologo is a fellow in the Society of Interventional Radiology and has been the recipient of numerous research awards, including awards for outstanding CT research from Philips Medical Imaging, the Radiological Society of North America Resident Röntgen Award, the Journal of Vascular and Interventional Radiology Award for Distinguished Clinical Study, the Society of Interventional Radiology Distinguished Plenary Presentation Award, and many others. He has served on numerous national and international committees, served as invited editor for multiple peer-reviewed journals, is a council member of the True Health Initiative, and has published many scientific papers. Dr. Prologo has spent the majority of his career researching new solutions for pain and weight loss. He is most well known for his pioneering a procedure to block hunger, allowing people to reach a critical point beyond which dieting was no longer a struggle, work that allowed him to define the critically acclaimed catching point, beyond which diet and exercise are easier for those trying to lose weight. The catching point was mathematically quantified using MET minutes and represents the point beyond which healthy living is enjoyable and easy. Dr. Prologo, thank you so much for joining us tonight. How are you doing?
Eric, I'm doing great. Thank you for that flattering introduction. That was really something. I appreciate it, and thank you for having me. And thank you everyone for logging on. This is super exciting for me.
Great. Well, I'm going to let Dr. Prologo talk a little bit about his book, his research, and then we have some questions that we'll get into. And then at the end, again, I mentioned use the chat feature, and we'll get to as many questions as time allows.
Okay, perfect. I'm going to share my screen, Eric, and we'll go through a couple of slides here just to sort of give the background, how all of this started, and what the idea was, and what we're trying to do now. And then we'll go from there. Again, thank you everyone for being here. The title of the book is The Catching Point Transformation. There is a subtitle there. We can talk about that a little bit later. But the book itself is available at most regular places, normal, typical places, some of which I've put here. What I'll take the time to do, I hope it's okay with everybody, this is my first time doing something like this, is give some background as to how the idea materialized for the book and why I did this and what message I'm trying to get across. And then afterwards we can talk. Hopefully that format will work out okay. So this is my mom, who I think might be logged on here tonight, but her picture is here because she's really the inspiration behind the book itself. for many reasons. She always encouraged me to read and encouraged me to write. But also we had these conversations, and the conversations that we had over the years are really the subject of the book, and I think translate to hundreds of millions of other people, I hope. So I'll tell you what that was. We talked about this difference here. Let me try and move this over a little bit. And this difference is really what I've come to learn over the years, especially through conversations with my mom, and then over the years with others, and then patients, and now patients, is that there's a column of people over here who are sort of the prototypical advisors when it comes to weight loss, and they always look so happy, and they're always in such great shape. And if you see these, I can't imagine why anyone wouldn't listen to them or wouldn't want to go through these same programs, because they really look quite enjoyable. But what we know, or what a lot of people know, is that there's another column of people over here who, hopefully you can see my mouse, who do the same activities as the folks on the right, verbatim, but they hate it, and they're not smiling, and the feelings that they have are not the same, and they don't want to wake up and ever do this again, because it's a terrible experience. And so once we can sort of accept that there are these two buckets, broadly speaking, of people when it comes to diet and exercise, then we can understand what disconnect there is. This is from chapter 1, actually, of the book. And it says, what do you mean you can't do this? I do it all the time. And this is exactly on this side, right? This little guy are these folks, right? And then on this side, the person who's speaking are these folks, right? And there's this tremendous disconnect, because the people on the right side of the screen here, they just don't get it, right? I mean, they'll say things to you like, I love to work out, and I can't wait to work out, and I can't live without working out. And they just don't understand it if you don't feel the same way. And so you sort of end up with this kind of a cartoon to illustrate this point, and you end up with this black expanse between these two groups of people. But why is this important? This is important because the advice, the gold standard for weight loss, is coming from this right side here, right? So there's this big black expanse between the people who need help and the people who are offering help. And so this disconnect has resulted in hundreds of millions of people. And where I'm getting that number, the CDC issued a report not long ago saying that at least 50% of Americans had tried a diet and failed in the last 12 months. So that's 150 million people there, and that's just in the United States. So this is a lot of people who are trying this advice from the right-sided column and failing. So this expanse is not just something to write about or talk about on the Alumni Author Series. This is something that's translating to real effect. And so if we keep moving on, the next thing that comes out of this, and this is sort of the context and the foundation of the book, which we can talk about more later. The second thing that you realize when you examine this phenomenon a bit more is that over here on the left side of the screen, you've got someone who's trying to do this, right? You've got someone who's engaged in task A. They're trying to make a change, right? And over here in column B, remember, the originators of the advice and the direction, these folks are not trying to do this, right? They're just pretty much staying the same and feeling good and engaged in what I would call maintenance activities. And so not only is there a disconnect between these two groups of people, and not only is the gold standard advice coming from the column on the right, but these two groups of people are engaged in two totally different tasks. Task A, to make a change, is a totally different thing than task B, which is to engage in maintenance activities. And so this disconnect then just gets wider and wider. So this is me about 10 years ago, and this is me about 5 years ago. And so what I realized myself personally was that crossing back over to what you thought you were doing before, when you were engaged in the maintenance activities, and I'm even smiling in that picture, and things were great and fun and not so difficult, even you couldn't live without working out. When you end up on the left side of the column and try to cross back, there are a tremendous number of forces that stop you from feeling the way that you felt before. This is not the same experience. And so the foundation of the book really is, why are we taking all of this advice from these people on the right who are engaged in maintenance activities which for them are not only easy, but enjoyable, when we on the left side of the column are trying to make a significant change, which is a totally different thing with a totally different group of feelings and resistances. And this disconnect explains why we have so many failures time after time after time after time. So from that point, we're going to skip over a lot of time, but I think it's important, a time in my life that is, but I think it's important for me to recognize or acknowledge that during that time, I became a doctor, and I also got an obesity medicine certification. So I'm credentialed, I'm qualified to answer these questions. But I spent my career then focusing on these things. These are sort of the box arrows from the previous slide. These are the things that stop you from crossing back over. These aren't feelings that you imagine in your mind. These aren't lack of willpower or some paucity of mental fortitude. These are biological forces and molecules that we can measure. And this is what they are. Your hunger hormones, they spike when you embark on this classic duo of doom, I call it. You start your exercise and your calorie restriction all on one day. The body perceives that as a starvation event, and your hunger hormones go through the roof. But Skinny Sally over here on the right, she doesn't feel that way when she goes to do this yoga exercise or whatever this dance thing is. And even if she's having kale afterwards, doesn't have this huge spike in the hunger hormones that the person who's trying to make a change does. Likewise, we have metabolism changes. When the person on the left embarks on this duo of doom again, his or her metabolism slows down. Why? Because the body perceives this as a starvation, as a famine, and says, whoa, if all of a sudden I'm going to have to run around all the time and not eat much, I better store everything that you do give me so I survive. So when you cut your calories, your body slows down the burn, and it upsets you and it fights you every step of the way. So we don't have to go in detail through each one of these. Suffice it to say that these things are real, measurable biological forces that block us from making the change that we want to make. And the people on the right, who are the originators of our advice, directions, and programs, don't feel this. So we have a disconnect. And then I spent the remaining time until now of my career trying to figure out how can we minimize these things? How can I take these away from the people who want to make a change, and how can I move them over to this column? How can I get them to a starting point that's equal so that when they embark on these things or they follow these programs, they don't feel all that biological backlash? How do I get them to a critical point after which they're smiling too? And I called that point the catching point and named the book The Catching Point Transformation, because the foundation and the goal of the book is to close that expanse, get rid of those obstacles, get everybody on the same starting line so we all feel the same and we're all speaking the same language. So I did that, and it was a big deal. So some of the things on here, the Today Show, and this is a talk that I gave at Harvard Medical School. This is German TV. The reason I put all this on here is because this was a new way of thinking. This is a new way of thinking, right? This is really debunking this historical idea of mind over matter, and telling people who come back to you and say, now I've started this diet and exercise program, but I didn't get very far because I can't tolerate it. And so our answer to that person has been, well, do it more, right? or try harder, right? Or just, grit your teeth and white knuckle through it. And that's what we've had. That's what we've had for like 100 years. So this was a big deal when we decided and started to show, right? It wasn't, you can't just go around and say this, right? You have to show this. So we did research and we did procedures where we blocked some of these things. We blocked the hunger hormones with a procedure called bariatric artery embolization. We blocked the hunger signal with a procedure called a cryovagotomy. We showed that you can keep a person's metabolism up if you let them eat while they're changing their exercise capacity, and on and on and on. We showed that you can change these things, you can take these things away, and you can make this whole thing easier for people instead of just telling them that they're not succeeding because they don't have willpower or they're not good or whatever. I mean, the last thing I'll say about that is that the people on the right, they're not having a hard time. So they're not really struggling or pushing through anything, right? They can't live without this activity. So it's clearly not the same experience. And so that's the point of the book. That's what we are trying to explain. A lot of this has already been proven. Most of it can be minimized. Most of those obstacles can be minimized without a procedure. The procedures are great because you can quantify them and they really support your point and prove what you're saying. But of course, there are many interventions that can be made into our lives to minimize the effect of those obstacles and make this whole transition easier for people so that the outcomes are changed, right? I mean, here's a picture of one patient here on the bottom. I should have included another picture of this person's name is Melissa, who's now 100 pounds lighter than she was in that picture. And here's another, and we have more and more and more behind there, just showing that we can change the outcomes by focusing on something different. And so the only way or the best way that I could come up with to bring this to the masses was through a book. And so I wrote the book. The book is out now, and that's why we're all here. And I hope that I didn't go on too long, Eric. And from there, I think I'll just stop. And if anybody has any questions about that, I could keep talking, but I'll just stop for now.
Yeah, well, David, thank you so much for sharing about that. Do you mind taking down? Perfect, great. I know when we first started talking, maybe about a month ago, I had watched the interview that you had on the Megyn Kelly show, and I was really, really fascinated by that entire thing. And I think this is the procedure, but the cryovagotomy.
Yes, cryovagotomy, right.
Where did you get that idea from?
So the cryovagotomy is one of the procedures that block those biological backlashes that were listed there. The cryovagotomy is this procedure whereby we take a needle and we use a CT scanner to guide this needle to a target in the body. And in this case, the target is a nerve. And we drop the temperature, which drops the signals in that nerve, stops the signals in that nerve. That's very useful in a setting of pain. And I spend most of my days freezing nerves to block pain from cancer, for example, or freezing nerves to block pain from pelvic pain and so on. And so we translated that procedure by picking a new target. But the entire reason for the cryovagotomy was not necessarily to create a new weight loss procedure, but rather to make this point that if you do something to the body, there will be this retrograde change in the mind, not the other way around. If you do something to the body that allows the person to stay on this program for 6 months or so, then we see changes in the mind. The mind gets on board, and now it's easier. It was really a proof of concept. And if you don't mind, I'll give you a few other examples. We have patients, we treat phantom limb pain. These are oftentimes veterans who have amputations, who feel pain in the foot, for example, that they don't have. And the principle is the same. These patients will be told, you're traumatized from the event and so on and on. Well, what we did was go into the residual limb with that same needle, freeze the residual nerve that had been damaged during the surgery or during the trauma. And that feeling of phantom limb pain went away. And most importantly, the reason I use that example is we took brain MRIs before we did that procedure and after. And the mind changed following a change to the body. And that sensation of pain in that phantom foot went away. And these things support the hypothesis that this historical mind over matter is nonsensical. And in fact, it's the other way around, right? It's matter over mind. We do something to the body that retrograde changes the mind. So that was the idea behind the cryovagotomy. Can we shut off hunger? And if we do, will that make dieting easier for people? And it did.
That's such an interesting and amazing concept. So I know one of the things I always like to do when we do these author series is ask why someone wrote the book. So why did you want to write The Catching Points Transformation? Where do you get the inspiration from? I'd love to know a little bit more about your thought behind it.
I appreciate that question as well. The entire impetus behind the book and the driving force behind the book was to get the message out that this condescending sentiment that is so popular in the world, and this message to those who struggle with weight loss that they are doing something wrong, or they are less of a person, or even worse, if somehow I could trade places with you, I'd be able to lose weight. I just know it, right? I'm sure that I could because, I'm not a piece of crap. This entire sentiment that is just rampant in the world is totally nonsensical, right? None of these people, or 99% of the people who spew this kind of stuff, none of them have ever actually made a significant change. So they don't know what it feels like. So they're really coming out of nowhere with that. And so I wanted to write the book to get that message out first. That was the first thing. I wanted to say to all the people who ever struggled out there and thought these kinds of things. I wonder if I have a slow thyroid. I wonder if I have slow metabolism or bad genetics. They're trying to say to you, look, my body's not letting me do this. And I wanted to get a mass response out there and say, you know what, you're right. You are absolutely right. Your body's not letting you do this. And so you were right all along. And so if anybody said anything other to you, then I want to apologize on their behalf. So that's the driving force to get the book out there. And then once you have that platform, I'm sure somebody will ask this, or everybody's thinking it now. Well, then what, right? If that's true, then how do I get around those obstacles and change my outcomes? And that's what the rest of the book is about.
Okay. We're starting to get some questions from the chat, and I'll get to those in a moment. One other concept was the outside-in approach. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So the outside-in approach is it's sort of a play on words, right? It's the counter sentiment to all of your successes when it comes to weight loss will start on the inside. Will start with your heart or start with your brain, and you're just going to have to white knuckle through it, right? That's kind of the inside out. Everything starts on the inside approach. And again, the people who make the t-shirts that say this thing never actually went through that change, right? And so that in and of itself, that driving force doesn't make any sense. That's akin to saying, look, Eric, I'm going to push your head underwater and let go, and you just stay underneath there, right? Just stay there. Well, you're going to stay there for a while, but your body's going to start to fire survival signals once it senses this decrease in air, not much different than the decrease in calories. And then eventually you're going to think about nothing else except getting air, which is exactly what happens to someone who stays on a calorie restriction for a long time. And then you're going to burst to the surface, right? You're not going to be able to overcome your survival signals with your mind. And so that's the part that's nonsensical. And then we flipped it around. Instead, it's the outside-in approach because of the interventions I explained, the phantom limb intervention, the cryovagotomy. And I'm not even talking about surgeries. I mean, if there's anyone who might want to sort of take the counterpoint to what I'm saying, I would point directly to metabolic surgeries. These are not willpower implantation surgeries, Eric. These are something that's done to the body, right? And then you've got hundreds of thousands of pounds lost, diseases cured like diabetes and hypertension, all in these same people who apparently were supposed to white knuckle through it. We did something to their body and we just made a landslide of changes across the world, right? So that's an outside-in approach to this long-standing problem. You're muted.
Sorry about that. So I know one of the things I always ask when talking with our wonderful authors that we have, basically is what has been the biggest, like when you were writing the book, what was the biggest challenge or roadblocks that you came across, during your writing or in publishing? Can you share a little bit for those people who may be interested in your writing process? Tell us a little bit more about that process.
Sure, boy, that was a real eye opener. The process of publishing a book, and the biggest challenge actually has been getting the word out, which is why I very much appreciate being invited here. The plan or the passion project here, as we discussed before, was to get this word out to the masses, right? And so the biggest challenge, to answer your question, was that when I got all of this on paper and I was happy with the message, I sort of found myself standing there with it, right? And even though I thought the message was important and I wanted to get it out, that's a whole different machine. And you really have to sort of work at it and find a way to get it into the hands of the people who might want to read it. And it's sort of independent of the message. It's independent of how well written it is. It's sort of independent of the whole thing. Whatever it is that you might create in this space, there's a different challenge that lies before you with regard to getting it out there. So people they'll read it and review it, and you'll get your feedback. But man, it's tough to get it out there. So again, thank you for having me on here today.
Yeah, of course. And honestly, that's one of the things that a lot of the people I've talked with that has been a big challenge for them. So my guess is that first moment that you held the book in your hand had to feel amazing.
It was great. It was great. It really took me a long time to get to this point. So I was happy about that for sure. I started this book at work, I remember, early in the morning in 2012, and here we are, 2022, and it's just a couple days out now, right? Yeah. So it was a 10-year grind just to get to here. So although it's not easy to necessarily generate a book that gets published, I think it's even harder now to get the word out, to beat the bushes and get the word out and get people to read it.
Yeah, I can well imagine that. So the last question I personally have, and then we'll get to our questions from our participants. John Carroll, it's what brings us here tonight, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about your John Carroll experience. How did John Carroll help shape the trajectory of your career? And then also, were there any teachers or experiences that really left an imprint on you wanting to become a doctor and follow this path?
Yes. Wow. So I'm glad you asked that question. So this will sound sort of traditional, I guess. My time at John Carroll was the best time of my life. For sure. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, and didn't want to be too far away from home. John Carroll's location gave me that perfect distance. And once I got there, the university itself really does embrace you. It's the perfect size, in my opinion, for a student who has an interest in something particular. I wanted to go to medical school. So you can find yourself with like-minded people around you in your close proximity. And so the people that I lived with and met there are my best friends, for sure. And the teachers that I had there are all my favorite teachers. And if I could stop at a point in time in my life and stay there forever, it would be 1994, right in the middle of my time at John Carroll, for sure. And I had a pre-med advisor, Dr. Klein, from sociology. I'm not sure if you and I have had a chance to talk about. Is he still there?
I don't believe so. I could be wrong.
He was so great, and he helped me with my writing in particular, and helped me with my weaknesses so that somebody would take me in some medical school somewhere, and certainly changed the trajectory of my life. So I am forever grateful to John Carroll.
That's wonderful to hear. And as someone who works for the university, that is, I think, one of the hallmarks of John Carroll is that our faculty really take a interest in our students, and the entire community does. The faculty and staff, and helps our students grow in the right direction and find their passion. So I'm so glad that you had that experience.
I couldn't agree more. 100%.
Well, let me get to some of the questions from our participants. So,
okay.
Our first question is, what strategies are there for weight loss that maybe don't have to do with surgery?
Oh, that's a great question. So the first kind of accuracy police comment I have to make is that these procedures that we've been talking about so far, they are not surgeries. They're needle procedures done by a subspecialty called interventional radiology. So where we block the arteries that go to the hunger hormone, that's like a heart catheterization. We go in through the wrist or in through the groin, and we guide our catheter to the stomach instead of the heart, and block those cells that produce ghrelin, the hunger hormone. Or we take a needle under CT guidance. Those are non-surgical procedures. So I just want to clear that up first. But surgery, Metabolic surgery, as I mentioned, also has, for the right candidates, tremendous outcomes, right? But to answer the question, there are so many things that you can do non-surgically on your own. And this is where I think I could have done a better job of marketing the book and saying what's actually in the book, because this is what's in the book. The book itself is not a diet book. It's the answer to this question. What can I do outside of a medical procedure, a surgery, or a medication to increase my chances of succeeding with diets? Okay. So some examples. The book is chock full of these, but some examples. The first thing we say all the time is ditch the static schedule. Every historical diet that we're used to comes in this sort of calendar form. You do this on Monday, and this on Tuesday, and this on Wednesday, and this on Thursday. That static schedule is just a recipe for failure, because when we get to Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday and our child is sick, or we're busy at work, and we just don't feel like sticking to the program on that day, what happens on that day? We just chuck the whole thing, right? We just chuck it up and we'll start another day. So in the book, we talk about this no restart principle, and we make the analogy to a coin collector. If one were a collector of coins, right? Rare coins, for example, you would collect these coins, and if you went on vacation somewhere, you'd pick a few up there and you'd have these coins. But if something happened in your life, like you were busy or you had to run the author alumni series, and you didn't have time to think about coins or collect them for a couple of days, you wouldn't take the ones you already collected and throw them out, right? You would go back to coin collecting when you were ready, and you would add to your collection, right? And that's the no restart principle. That's how we ditch the static schedule. We worry about getting as much done in, say, 90 days as we can, versus getting everything done on a 90-day schedule. Hitting that 90-day schedule, or any time period, because that's how a lot of these things are marketed: 6 months, 30 days, 90 days. Hitting each and every one of those things is almost impossible. 95% of people who try fail. But if you had the no restart principle and you treated it like coin collecting, and you went through a few days of exercise, for example, but you just couldn't do the Thursday one, and maybe even the Friday one, if you just didn't do that and then came back in where you left off, when you get to the end of that 90 days, you won't have it all done, but you'll have something done. And that something allows you to move forward, not from the same starting line over and over and over again. It gives you a new place to move forward from. So principles like that. Another thing that we talk about in the book is focusing on recovery. I'll talk about recovery in a second. Probably another important one is not starting a calorie restriction and an exercise thing on the first day together, right? We talk about increasing your exercise capacity to that number that you said in the beginning, 220 minutes first, without worrying about food. Because what that does is that blocks that metabolism change for you, and it gives you the ability to burn calories. For example, hopefully I'm not going on too long. If your job was to empty a pool, right, and all you had was a Dixie cup, you would sit and try to empty that pool, the Dixie cup. That's most people's exercise capacity. You really can't make a dent with the shape you're in now, right? But if you spend the 4 or 5 months getting into a different kind of shape, getting to that critical 220 met minutes without worrying about your diet, then when you gradually bring in your calorie restriction at that point, you are much more likely to succeed, right? And then third, focusing on recovery. You're trying to make a change in your body. That change occurs in between workouts. And in between those workouts, in between those exercise bouts, you've got to eat the right things, supplement with the right things, so that your exercise capacity changes. So that's just 3 examples of the non-surgical interventions that you can take on to any diet. And this is why I wish I would have marketed the book better, because we're everybody's friend here. You can do whatever diet you want, keto or paleo or whatever it might be, Atkins. You're going to fail them all for the same reasons. But if you get a chance to read The Catching Point and you understand those principles, then you can make each and every one of those work.
That makes sense a lot. I mean, and I think the whole recovery, or the whole metabolism, starvation, and diet plus working out, that's a light bulb moment for me of like, if you're going into starvation mode or survival mode.
For sure. Your body doesn't realize you're just trying to look pretty for the summer. Your body thinks, oh my gosh, there's some reason now I don't have access to food, and maybe I have to just climb over the mountains all the time now. So when you cut your calories by 500, say, just for example, your body is slowing down and storing everything you eat anyway. And so it's offsetting you so that you don't die. But what does that translate to in the real world? Doctor, I cut my calories by 500 for however long, and I swear I didn't lose a pound. That's true, explainable, but historically the reaction would have been, you're probably eating Doritos in the closet or something like that. So we want to get away from that and stick with the biological explanations.
Makes complete sense. Next question is about how you determine the best intervention for your patients. How do you make that determination? Do you follow an algorithm?
A great question. These are such great questions. So these JCU grads in the crowd here. So a lot of it has to do, the primary answer here is BMI, okay? When we talk about surgery, real surgery, gastric bypass, gastric sleeve, all those sorts of things, the metabolic surgeries, those are traditionally for people with a BMI of 40 and above, or sometimes 37 and above, if you've got some comorbidity like diabetes. So the primary answer to this question is our procedures, our embolization or our cryovagotomy, or for the people who are overweight, which is a BMI of greater than 25, but they don't qualify for bariatric surgery. That segment of people are most of the people you know, right? So if people aren't familiar with BMI, these are your friends that are walking around at 5'5", 250, right? And they're overweight and or obese, but these are not bariatric surgery candidates. So they're really stuck in limbo, right? They don't have great treatments. They just have those people that I showed on the slides on the TV saying, be like me, but they're really without other good intervention. And so that is the segment of people for whom these procedures were developed.
Okay. Another question is focusing on like the new drugs that are out there, like Ozempic. So what are your thoughts on them? The person who asked the question of the similar focus to a vagotomy, but reduces hunger by feeling full. What are your thoughts on all the new drugs that are out there?
So that's a great question. So a couple pieces of that answer. So quickly about the vagotomy. So the vagotomy does indeed block hunger, but it also slows transit of food through the stomach. And so it does give you that feeling of being full, right? And that is the mechanism of action for a lot of these drugs as well. They work centrally and they also slow transit. So the cutoff that we use in the obesity medicine literature is 5%. If you can lose 5% of your body weight and you're overweight or obese, you can significantly change your risk for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, even cancer. And these drugs meet that threshold, right? So they are also targeted, honestly, now this is my opinion here, they're targeted for the same group of people who are in that 26 to 37 BMI, who just need to sort of get over the hump, right? And that was another name for the book actually that floated around in the beginning, because again, we're talking about the same thing. If you can use these drugs to get yourself to that critical point after which it's not a struggle, then I'm all for it.
One other question, and I'm not quite sure how if you can't answer this, but I'll mention it, and maybe you can do your best. One of the people joining us tonight has Hashimoto's for over 15 years, is taking Armour thyroid and eating a gut healing diet, but still struggling to lose weight. What would you advise just as a first step for that individual?
Right. Buy this book. No. So I think, when you start to superimpose real medical conditions. So another segment of the book talks about exactly this question, right? And that is what things are superimposed on this baseline set of principles that we described and we talked about. And one of those is a real medical condition, right? So that's got to be handled differently. I would recommend that if you're in Cleveland, there are great obesity medicine specialists there who can manage your Hashimoto's as well as a weight loss program. But beyond that, there are also medications that, and this might also apply to the Hashimoto's patient. People are on medications that they don't realize are either putting weight on them or stopping them from losing weight. A great example of that is antihistamines. People will take antihistamines like Benadryl, over-the-counter Benadryl even, not realizing that that's putting weight on you. That's in our guidelines. When people come in, what can we stop medication-wise that will interrupt weight gain? And Benadryl is a common one that people are surprised by. But back to the question, we have to review that person's medication regimen, right? It's very likely there's something on that list that is either adding to weight gain or potentially interrupting weight loss. And so we'll review those medications, but it can definitely be done with the help of an obesity medicine specialist. And they're certified ABOM docs all over.
Now, would you say the same thing as someone who is diabetic?
So diabetes is a better one. I like that one better because diabetes can be reversed, right? I mean, that's something that we've seen with surgery. We've seen with the right medication and diet/exercise combination, people lose that significant amount of weight and their blood sugars normalize. So although it is complicated, I would agree that it fits the bill in that sense. It's a little bit more attractive to me as a physician to treat because it can be reversed, and so can high blood pressure. Okay.
I have one other question. I'm going to offer any other questions from the participants. So if you have any other questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. We'll end up here in a couple minutes. One other question. If someone wants to do something about creating a healthier lifestyle for themselves, what would be their first step? Because sometimes that is the hardest thing, is finding that, just that motivation to do that first thing. What would you recommend that they do?
Right. Okay. So buy this book. No. So you keep lobbing that up there. So I think the first step is I don't want to speak in negatives, but I don't know how else to say this. The first step is to abandon the idea that you have to combine exercise and calorie restriction. That would be the first thing I would do. The first thing I would do is just get that out of your mind, right? Because you think to yourself on Monday, I'm going to go for a jog and I'm not going to eat donuts, right? It's always those two things together. So the very first thing I would do is forget the calorie restriction part of it, or it can go either way, but just for the purposes of illustration, forget the calorie restriction part of it and change your exercise capacity, right? So your very first step, wherever you might be right now, is to start to work towards that 220 met minutes, which, by the way, that means that that's roughly translated into the ability to jog lightly without stopping for 30 minutes. Okay, that's roughly what 220 met minutes is. If you can take yourself from wherever you are now to that exercise capacity, then introduce your calorie restriction, whichever one you might want it to be. If you want it to be keto or Atkins or vegan diet, whatever it might be, you will have a much greater chance of succeeding, because at that 220 met minutes, that's your catching point, right? After which it's not going to be so miserable. So the first thing I would do is separate those two things so that you have a better chance of going forward. And it works the other way too, just in case my wife is listening. It works the other way too. You can not exercise in the beginning. Keto is a popular one for this. And you can change your caloric intake. And it will be difficult for a while. It will be impossible, by the way, if you start both at once. But if you set exercise aside and go for a while following that diet, you'll reach a certain point where you don't feel miserable anymore. You can start exercising, and then you are off to the races. So the answer to your question is split those two apart. That's your first step.
Okay, that's super helpful. Since you mentioned diets, someone just asked, do you recommend a plant-based diet?
Yes.
Easy answer.
Absolutely, because the plant-based diets are, we were talking about weight loss, right? But just overall, in the grander scheme of things, plant-based diets are associated with a decreased risk of all these different things independent of weight loss.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'll do two more questions. One should be pretty easy. How many times per week to jog 30 minutes?
Oh, great. So there are recommendations out there. So I want to say two things about this. There's a registry that's out there, the National Weight Loss Registry, and it correlates. It takes all the people who have lost significant amounts of weight and kept it off, and then it surveys them and it correlates their answers with the people that succeed. And the only consistent answer there is exercise, right? And so the recommendations, the formal recommendations are more than 150 minutes per week, right, of exercise. That's the minimum recommendation. The number that I recommend is 300. If
Okay.
you can get to 300 minutes a week, you'll get to that catching point. You'll change your exercise capacity. Then you can change and bring in your calorie restriction.
So for someone who maybe has knee issues, like bicycling, same kind of like lower impact kind of workouts work the same thing as jogging?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is where places like Orange Theory are useful, because they use heart rate variability and feedback mechanisms to make sure you're in that right zone, even if you're rowing, even if you're on the seated bike, because this scenario that you mentioned is common. We see a lot of people who need knee replacements and their BMI is too high, so they don't qualify for a knee replacement, but they can't exercise to lose the weight because their knee hurts, right? So this is a tough spot to be in for sure. And so the answer is low impact for sure, and all of those things that you mentioned, as long as you're raising your heart rate for that number of minutes.
Okay. And I guess the last question, and then I'll wrap it up. What led you from vascular and interventional radiology to obesity medicine?
Oh, so those things really happened in parallel. I
Okay.
was always pursuing the obesity medicine certification as I was formally training in interventional radiology. And then what I found myself doing for a career was managing pain. And so as I neared the end and the exam for the obesity medicine certification and learned all these mechanisms of hunger and survival and all these things that we talked about tonight, I just happened in my day job to be freezing nerves to stop pain. And so those two things came together in a very serendipitous way that we ended up freezing a nerve for a different reason.
Well, again, David, thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are incredibly grateful that you took time out of your evening to join us. And on behalf of the university, we are incredibly fortunate to have you within our alumni community. So thank you again.
That's so kind of you to say. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who logged on.
Before we conclude, I want to remind you that you can register for a number of other upcoming programs that we have through the Office of Alumni Relations and the John Carroll University Alumni Association. We have programs upcoming on K-12 education in the time of COVID, health and well-being for women, how to make and sustain meaningful relationships in an ever-increasing digital world, and a peek into the future of the physics program at John Carroll. You can learn more about these programs at jcu.edu/alumni. Additionally, we invite you to view the recordings of all of our previous programs on the John Carroll University Alumni Association YouTube channel. This program should be up on that channel in the next 5 days or so. To view our extensive library, including our Alumni Author Series, ACES, JCU Junior, a program for kids, and God in All Things, search for John Carroll University Alumni on YouTube. Finally, please consider a charitable gift to John Carroll in support of our students, our faculty, and our entire campus community. If you've already made a gift this year, thank you so much for your generosity. If you have not, please join me in supporting John Carroll so we can continue to deliver an outstanding education for our current and future Blue Streaks. You can make a donation by visiting jcu.edu/give. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Take care, be well, stay safe, and onward on John Carroll.